Hi there, I'm Doug Furr, author of the Eruption universe and related works, and welcome to my channel. The following video is going to be narrated by a text-to-speech engine. I suffer from a speech impediment which makes it very difficult for me to read off script without either stuttering, or repeating over myself, as you just saw right there. The text-to-speech engine is made using my own voice, and the content that the text-to-speech engine will be narrating is entirely my own and not AI generated. I think it's possible to say no to things like AI generated slop and environmental destruction while also saying yes to the careful use of technology that helps people with disabilities communicate and lead a more fulfilling life. I appreciate you approaching my videos with an open mind, and I hope you enjoy the show. Thank you for watching.
Eruption, Part 1, Yellowstone. So we should probably start with the titular eruption, the point of divergence at which this becomes alternate history. December 15th, 1985. I should probably preface this by saying that I am not a volcanologist, or a geologist, or a meteorologist, or really a scientist of any discipline. I am merely a history nerd with a focus on Cold War geopolitics, espionage, and military strategy. I am very much an enthusiastic amateur when it comes to the sciences of volcanism and climatology, and while I have tried to make the eruption and its aftermath as plausible as I can, there is a bit of narrative license taken here and there. This should by no means be taken as an academic theorem on the effects of a supervolcano, rather as a literary plot device. If there are any actual scientists who study volcanism who happen to come across this video and would like to leave any input on the story, I would love to hear it. Like I said, I find this stuff fascinating, and I'm always open to learning more. So as I stated, the Yellowstone eruption officially started December 15th, 1985. There are usually other geologic events that occur prior to a major volcanic eruption, such as earthquakes, releases of gases and steam from the caldera, etc. There almost certainly would have been an increase in activity in the Yellowstone caldera as well. However, for the purposes of establishing the setting, we will say the official date of divergence into the alternate timeline, with the understanding that there were small events that differed before then. While we will go into the political and societal impacts of the eruption in a later video, I will say that under the austerity and headiness of the Reagan administration in the mid-80s, there's a good chance that these warning signs were either not studied properly, or that if they were, the warnings of the scientists were ignored. The caldera first collapsed inward, undergoing what is known as a dry eruption. There wouldn't be any lava flows at the start of the eruption, but thousands of tons of ash and volcanic gases would be blasted into the air, and pyroclastic flows and lahars would race across the Rockies, some of it eventually spilling into the Midwest. But the lava would come several days after the initial blast, creeping its way through the valleys and lowlands and swallowing everything in its path. Ashfall covered the entire midsection of North America, from Hermosillo to Lethbridge, and from Boise to St. Louis. This ash would range from just dusting towards the end of the range to being several feet deep near the caldera. The noise from the blast would have been tremendous, likely rivaling, if not exceeding, the Krakatoa eruption as the loudest noise ever recorded in human history, and the shockwave itself was lethal to anyone near the caldera. Again, we will go into greater detail of the aftermath later, but tens of thousands would have perished instantaneously during the blast. The huge plume of ash and sulfur would have blocked out the sun across most of North America. Aircraft would have been grounded, and satellite communication would have been blocked, certainly complicating rescue and relief efforts, along with isolating the West Coast from the eastern U.S., something to keep in mind. The otherwise fairly unremarkable winter of 1985 to 1986 would have turned into a volcanic winter. Canada received record snowfalls of pale gray snow mixed with ash. Global temperatures fell between 2 to 5 degrees Celsius on average. These volcanic winters lasted for roughly 10 years, and long-term climate effects continued until the present, 2017 in universe. The snow line lowered, and some of the polar ice that had begun to melt by this point began to refreeze. crops failed across most of the northern latitudes for several years. Some areas in northern Canada and Russia that had formerly experienced a growing season were no longer arable. Conversely, the tropics would be cooler and wetter throughout the 90s and the 2000s. This would bring a great deal of relief to drought-stricken regions of sub-Saharan Africa and begin to reverse desertification. The Amazon would also see a resurgence, as the effects of global warming had been reversed. The main sequence of eruptions would last around 2 years. By the end of 1987, most of the lava flows had ceased, and the caldera had finally returned to pre-eruption levels of activity. Smaller eruptions and earthquakes would continue throughout the rest of the 80s and 90s, with the volcano finally being declared dormant again around 2010. During this time, many Americans still considered the eruption zone too dangerous to consider resetting, and it remained mostly a barren wasteland. Again, we will go over the geopolitical consequences in future episodes, but the big takeaway here is that this was the biggest disaster in recorded history, and likely one of the darkest chapters of human existence. Such a disaster would cause a paradigm shift in how humanity viewed their relationship to the natural world. Unsurprisingly, my biggest inspiration for how Yellowstone would erupt was the Mount St. Helens eruption. I live about a 2 hours drive from Mount St. Helens, and I've actually done some writing while camping or hiking on the very ground that had once been ash or lava from that eruption. The site is also home to an awesome visitor center, and is well worth the visit if you are in the area. Seeing the site in person truly puts the terrifying power of nature into perspective. One can still see the flattened trees and the gray ashen crater where plants dare not take root. If a relatively minor eruption like St. Helens can cause such devastation, then we can only speculate on the power of a true supervolcano. The world would be irrecoverably changed, and not necessarily for the better. Until next time, Doug Fur.